Welcome to the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. The meeting has now commenced. It is April 13th at 4 p.m. This meeting is being held virtually due to COVID-19 to allow for social distancing and protect the public health. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourself until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you only use the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so we can track quorum. Also, in order to comply with the state open meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by using the chat function. So with that, I would like to do roll call. Please say that you're present when I call your name. Michael Edmonds.
Present.
Olga Flores.
Present.
Shariah Jimenez.
Present.
Monica Lane. Excuse me. Okay, Monica is absent. Jim Toffel, I'm present. Liz Wilson.
I'm here.
Jay Young.
Here.
Mindy Bernstein. Mindy is not here. And Lori Matzerbo.
Mindy's here. Oh,
Mindy, okay, great.
late.
Lori, oh, Mindy is here.
Yes.
Okay. Lori Manzerbo. Okay, Lori appears to be absent. Okay, our ex officio members, Maggie Amato Tellez is absent. Wendy Asher.
Present.
Marianne Bierling. Mark Clark.
I'm here.
Vicky Cusino, is that pronounced correctly?
That's correct. I'm present.
Dan Sullivan. Veronica Morena. Okay, Veronica is absent. Corin Manning.
Present.
And Liz Morales.
Present.
Okay, so we have a quorum. Our agenda for today is to review the meeting minutes from our March meeting. We'll do a call to the audience. Our first agenda item is Affordable Housing Finance 101, which will be led by Joan Service. And we're going to review the Accessory Dwelling Unit Ordinance. And third, we're going to spend most of our time today talking about the Commission goals and priorities. And then we'll finish with a housing update by the Housing Department. And finally, we'll talk about our next steps and adjourn the meeting. So our goal is to get through this in 2 hours. So the meeting minutes from our March meeting were available online. Are there any comments or changes to the meeting minutes?
No. I make a motion that the minutes be approved.
Okay, Mindy, you made a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
I second.
Who was that?
Olga?
Olga? Okay, Olga, second. Any comments before the question?
None.
Okay, I will call roll. Michael?
I approve. I agree.
Approve. I didn't make notes on who is here. Is Olga here? Or is Olga
Yes,
absent? Okay. Olga?
I approve.
Okay. Sharia?
Approved.
Liz?
I approve.
Jay?
Yes.
Mindy?
Approved.
Okay. The meeting minutes are approved. Okay, on to the third agenda item, the call to the audience. This is a time when any member of the public may address the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. Due to time constraints, the total time allocated for this is 15 minutes. Individuals are allowed 3 minutes each. Due to the open meeting laws, Commission members cannot discuss topics that are not on the agenda. Items brought up by a public may be considered as an agenda item for future meetings. So would anybody like to speak from the public? Okay, Catherine Hess, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, distinguished commission members. My name is Catherine Hess, and I am a Tucsonan. And I would like to start with a quote attributed to Aristotle. As soon as the leaders became philosophers, the city prospered. A more recent philosopher, Simone de Beauvoir, wrote that in a patriarchal culture, woman only exists in relation to man. I would like to extend that idea to include that people exist in relation to the government, and inversely, the city of Tucson exists in relation to Tucsonans. Tucsonans are struggling is evident by the creation of this commission. Housing insecurity has become a hallmark of Tucsonans' existence. I know this because I have been a Tucsonan for over 30 years, and I have watched the housing market for sales begin catering to the purchasing power of the Californian buyer to the detriment of the average Tucsonan since the mid-90s. According to data I pulled today from City-Data website for Tucson, in 2000, the median Tucsonan income was approximately $31,000 a year. TucsonAZ.gov states the median rent at that time was $602 a month. HUDuser.gov stated the price of a purchase of a median home for the year 2000 was $132,000. Fast forward to the year 2019, a year before the COVID pandemic, City.data.com website for Tucson stated the median Tucsonan income is approximately $44,000 a year. That's only an increase of $13,000 a year over relatively 20 years, which translates to an increase in income of less than $1,000 a year. The Department for Numbers.com, using a census survey, determined that the median rent in Tucson for 2019 was approximately $930 a month, a 1/3 increase from 2000, though median incomes had not increased by 1/3. Census.gov stated that in 2019, the median cost of a home was $155,000. Although I find this a little low, it's still an increase of $23,000, which is a higher increase than the $13,000 for median income, but still reasonably safe housing could be achieved in 2019. Today, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Housing prices have increased dramatically in the past year, though it's too soon to have reliable government statistics. Popular press websites seem to agree the median house in Tucson is approximately $275,000, which is an increase in cost of over $100,000 in 1 year. But as you can see from the rental statistics I presented a few moments ago, I'm here to advocate for the renter too. I've watched the cost of rent increase in Tucson so quickly that if it increases as dramatically as it did in 2021 as it did in 2020, I will no longer be able to afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment for myself and my son. KOLD 13 here in Tucson has been following the rental market since the pandemic, and they have determined the median rent has increased by at least 6%, depending on the neighborhood more. I am a renter, I am a single parent. I am sure that my situation is not unique. But aside from my identity as those two things, I'm also an adjunct at Pima Community College. I'm a PhD student at the University of Arizona in the English department. And for about a decade.
Catherine, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're running over on your time. Are you about done?
I am.
Okay, go ahead.
For about a decade, I've been an officer of the Superior Court, licensed as a process server. I would like to discuss my lived experience as a Tucson and struggling with housing insecurity. Even having income from 2 careers as an educator and a court officer, I have no other financial support. I can barely cover the rent for the new apartment I was forced to rent this month because my private landlord sold the property I'd been renting for several years. In January, I became a part of COVID statistics. I spent February recovering, and in that month, my landlord told me she was capitalizing on the housing market. Honestly, I understood it was a good business decision. Thus, I began looking online during a global pandemic and mid-semester for a new home for myself and my son. I found a listing for a 24-foot travel trailer being marketed as a 1-bedroom house for $750 a month, and luxury apartment rentals for more than I make in 1 month. I searched through Zillow, Trulia, Apartments.com, Remax Rentals, and private property management companies. There were no private landlords in the area that I needed to stay for my son to maintain his high school. I resigned myself to apartments, and I found one in my son's school district, but it increased my rent by $250 a month, and it was the cheapest I could find. I believe many Tucsonans have a similar experience in the housing market that I do. I ask, how are these drastic increases in basic good and housing advantageous for the sustainability of Tucson and the Tucson economy when only a few residents from more affluent states like California can afford to live here? It seems like a short-term gain for a long-term loss, and it is something like we saw in the 2008 housing market crash. Where will Tucsonans go when we cannot afford to live here anymore? I believe this commission is about the possibility that can be provided to establish Tucsonans. I know this commission has limits, but it also has the power of possibility for equitable housing in Tucson. Why else would it be so named?
Okay.
Catherine,
I'm
2 sentences. Can I have 2 sentences? I worked hard on this. How can I and other concerned Tucsonans work with you to harness the power of possibility for housing equity? Lastly, and most importantly, will Tucsonan leaders become philosophers so Tucson can prosper? I'm grateful for the privilege to speak here, especially the extra time. And I appreciate the attention the commission has given me as an advocate for housing security for all Tucsonans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I'd like to open it up with anybody else would like to speak today. Okay, hearing none, we are going to move to the next agenda item, which is an overview of affordable housing. We have Joan Service with us today, who is the Executive Director for the Arizona Housing Coalition, which is a nonprofit in Phoenix that advocates for affordable housing in the state. And I appreciate you, Joan, you being here today. Do you have the ability to share your screen?
I do. Can you all see it?
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, so I will try and be as brief as possible. Please throw the rope if I need to be done, though. Joan Service with the Arizona Housing Coalition, the Executive Director. We are a statewide organization working to end homelessness by advocating for safe, affordable homes for all Arizonans. Just as a baseline of understanding, and I think you all probably have reviewed this in the past, but we're looking at before the pandemic began, the point in time street and shelter count, which advocates would agree is neither precise nor perfect, but a data point nonetheless. We're looking at over 500,000 individuals in America that are experiencing homelessness. In Arizona, again, this is from January 2020, so before the global pandemic really kind of came home. We have, just shy of 11,000 individuals experiencing homelessness on any given night in Arizona. Now, to really understand this, the reality is that there's a lot of different contributing factors to a very complex problem that is homelessness. But the simplest thing to understand is that these people, folks who are experiencing homelessness are struggling, and they have a lack of safe, affordable place to call home. We have a lack of affordable housing in our community. This is actually a graph that I often use in presentations to show the lack of affordable housing in our community. Our rental housing supply in our state, it can only meet a quarter of the need. The state has just 26 available and affordable rental homes for extremely low income renter households. Only 2 other states, California and Nevada, have a greater shortage. And you think about the fact that ever since the last economic downturn, we had a plentiful housing supply back then, but budget shortfalls, eviction and homeless prevention programs have dried up, and we have years long wait list for getting government assistance for housing. It was, but this is not just an Arizona specific problem. As you can see, all the communities in the red, that's ultimately it's the affordable housing crisis has swept America, but we feel it very much so in the Southwest Valley or Southwest states. Here's another report that shows that to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment without spending more than 30% of your income on housing, you need to make $21.10 in Arizona. And so basically what this shows is that housing costs are out of reach for the average renter, for millions of low-wage workers, for people living in disability, or people with disabilities or living on fixed income. Ultimately, anybody with minimum wage has to work over 57 hours per week to afford a modest 1-bedroom apartment. And if you are that employee, that minimum wage worker was a single parent and needed a 2-bedroom, they would have to work 70+ hours per week to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. But then you think about the fact that these are the different wages that a full-time worker must earn to afford a modest rental home compared to the median wage of 12 of the largest occupations in this country. So, our Arizona's, it was at $21.10. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Is someone speaking? I can't hear if they are.
Someone unmuted you. Go ahead and continue, Joan, please.
Okay, apologies. So you see that, obviously, folks working in the hospitality industry, retail service workers, folks working in even office and clerical settings, financial clerks, they can't even make that housing wage of $21.10. So you think about the fact that, when we talk about affordable housing 101, I just think about the fact that affordable housing, you really need to have a passion to get into this game. Affordable housing developers are just the same as market rate developers. They have the same kind of responsibilities and costs, land costs, entitlement costs, environmental and locality reviews, public approval. But then you have to add on income restrictions, annual income reviews, occupancy standards. Then there's the public perception and the need and the stacks of capital needed for financing affordable housing development, as well as public policy that plays out in this affordable housing space. And that's pre-development. Then you add, once the construction is actually developed, you look at market rate and affordable housing, they all have the same costs in terms of property management, maintenance, upkeep, utilities, amenities. But then affordable housing often comes with costs like service coordination expenses, community facilities, and operating reserves. So there's a heavy burden, but a lot of passion and value add to our community. When we think about how to keep rents affordable, you need to think about the different subsidies that can help make rents affordable. Operating subsidies basically help cover the difference between a tenant's rent that's charged and the actual cost of operating that unit. Development subsidies are like tax credits or federal housing programs like home and community development block grants that pay the cost of construction development or rehab and by covering that cost, there's an allowability for lower rents. Rent for extremely low income households, that they can afford to cover the cost, you need to have, either free or no or low debt financing. And so really gap financing is the way we have to bridge we have to cover between the total development costs and the funds that a developer can get back from the bank, and then obviously the funds that can be recouped through rent. So we really need to have that gap financing conversation. And so when we think about those gap financing, oftentimes we look at a few of these different funding sources. The federal low-income housing tax credit, you might hear it referred to as LIHTC. That is a program that's been around since 1986. It was created under President Reagan and is actually responsible for the development of more than 3.3 million apartments across the nation. Locally in Arizona, over 53,000 units have been created under the federal low-income housing tax credit program, serving over 128,000 Arizona families. It is one of the most important tools in our affordable housing development toolbox. Federal government programs like the Community Development Block Grant, Home Investment Partnership Program, Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, commonly referred to as Section 8, and then Veteran Supportive Housing and HUD 811 for our disabled community, HUD 202 programs for our senior housing. These are all examples of government programs. I put a picture of HUD there. That's the HUD office in DC. It's an example of probably the worst example of affordable housing, right? I mean, it's a very archaic 1980s building, but when we think about affordable housing, we really need to kind of move away from the perception and really look at what the beautiful buildings that are being created under for affordable housing. Okay, that was a sidetrack. Sorry about that. State government programs, I will get into that in a little bit, but I just want to say that in the state of Arizona, we don't have enough government programs addressing affordable housing and the supports needed to allow families to remain stably housed. But we do have, tools like the Housing Trust Fund and private activity bond financing, but again, it's not enough. And then local government programs have financing options like reduced fines and fees and other incentives. But these are, again, the major sources of gap financing to make rents affordable and make affordable housing development projects pencil. I talk a lot about these different funds because ultimately when the work that we do is we advocate at the federal, state, and local level, and I'm a firm believer that you have to follow the money. And so we monitor the federal, state, and local level to the extent that we can. At the federal level, we monitor the budget process when there is a budget process to make sure that there's no slashes in federal housing budgets. But the reality is that we have a new administration that's really gung-ho about addressing our affordable housing crisis. President Biden has a ambitious housing blueprint that is coming forth not only in HUD financing, HUD budgets, but also in his infrastructure package. But ultimately, he's some of his 10-year plans include expanding the Housing Choice Voucher Program, requiring states that receive government assistance to allow for affordable housing development to be built, and then to reinstate some Obama era, an Obama era rule requiring communities to create a plan to mitigate discriminatory housing practices. I talked a little bit about the state level and how there wasn't a lot, and so I just kind of want to hone in on the fact at the state level, we really have got some work to do. We really need more of a state investment, and we think the two policy levers in doing that are the Housing Trust Fund, restoring that to its pre-recession levels, and then enacting a state affordable housing tax credit, which mirrors the federal low-income housing tax credit and serves as an opportunity to, again, reduce that gap in financing to make rent more affordable. I will share that we at the Housing Coalition, we have introduced legislation this session, and we are at this moment, and again, this is April 13th at 4:25. We have support to restore the Housing Trust Fund to at least $5 million more from its original statutory cap at $2.5 million. But let me just share that when I say pre-recession level, back to when it's before the last economic downturn, the Housing Trust Fund was at its heyday about $30 to $40 million. And the Housing Trust Fund is a very flexible source of state funding to meet, rising street homelessness, eviction prevention, provide support for homeless shelters, and then again, serving as that gap financing. So it's a very flexible fund that we've been advocating to be invested in. And then, as I mentioned, the state affordable housing tax credit, which mirrors the federal program. The state tax credit, we also have support as of 4/13 at 4:26 p.m. at our state legislature, but they are knee deep in budget negotiations. And so I'm happy to keep you all apprised of that as this goes forward. Locally, we are a staff of 6 and based in Phoenix, but covering the whole state. And so because we can't be at 15 county supervisor hearings or 90 cities and towns throughout the state, we instead try to do exactly this. And frankly, this virtual environment has allowed us to expand the message and be a resource to you all. How can we help conversations around planning and zoning and creating neighborhood buy-in, which are the 2 big factors as it relates to local efforts to create affordable housing. Almost done. Just wanted to share that, obviously as housing advocates, we're really focused on, how COVID-19 has exacerbated our affordable housing crisis. We, we already were in it, and then obviously this health crisis illustrates how closely health and housing are tied. We are anticipating an increase in individuals experiencing homelessness by conservative estimates as much as 16%, if not more. But ultimately, the folks that we represent, because again, we represent the professionals in the field working to end homelessness and create affordable housing. That's where our membership and many folks on the phone, this is where you all shine, because we are very flexible and nimble and resourceful advocates. And so we need to have, we're armed with the data. We need to have, we have the practical solutions. We just need the community and political will to move forward and address these big issues. We also need to have some really tough conversations. Conversations about evictions, about systemic inequities, about our affordable housing shortage, about the lack of shelter beds. And ultimately, these tough conversations that we have will help us on a better path to address housing for all. I talked briefly about evictions, but man, that's just been kind of just a lot, frankly. But ultimately, I just want to share that as it relates to evictions, rental assistance is really the kind of saving grace in all this, in this conversation. We need to support both the renter and the landlord. We need to have strong communication between these 2 parties, because they are very symbiotic, and we need to make sure that every rental unit actually becomes a supportive home, and every landlord becomes that supportive housing advocate alongside that landlord, or alongside that tenant. So I'll be brief there, but just say that evictions are they're ripe for reform, but ultimately I'm really pleased that we have rental assistance, emergency rental assistance, helping both landlords and tenants. I'm a firm believer, this is actually an old article, but I'm a firm believer that housing has always been the primary contributor to this country's massive racial wealth gap. Housing policies have really kind of created the segregated communities that we live in today. And we really need to talk about, if we're going to talk about systemic housing or systemic racism, we need to talk about housing. We need to begin with housing. Home ownership is still primarily a white institution. We need to provide some rental protections for Black and Hispanic families. And we need to make that home ownership path a lot easier for all. It's really it's impossible to fully address these issues, in my opinion, without starting at home. Our nation's housing system and the programs and policies, frankly, that perpetuate these disparities in housing is the best place to start. But we need congressional action. And finally, we're seeing that congressional action to take place with significant and ongoing investments to programs like Section 8 and the Housing Choice Voucher Program and Community Development Block Grants to see housing become a reality for all. And with that, I wanted to leave my contact information there. I'm going to give it maybe 5 seconds, then I'll stop sharing so I can see your faces. So if there's any questions or comments. Going once, going twice, and stop share.
Thank you, Joan. That was great. One question that did come up from the group is if we could get a copy of your presentation.
Absolutely.
And we'll, if you're okay with it, we'll post it on our website.
Sure thing.
Okay. So I'd like to open up to any questions. Yes, Shreya.
Hi, Joan. It's good
Hi,
to see you. I think I met you in another forum. So basically, thank you so much for the work that you do and for keeping us up to date. I'm curious, so to learn a little bit more, one thing about the Housing Trust Fund, how does that, is that specifically state money? How does that get down to city level?
Yeah, so it's the state that collects the funds, and it's funded from unclaimed property proceeds. So if you were to move from Arizona to Colorado and you had money in a savings account and left, or if you had a piece of property and left, the state of Arizona could sell it off, and a portion of those proceeds would go to the Housing Trust Fund, a very small portion, ultimately a $2.5 million cap of that portion. And so it's the state of Arizona that administers the Housing Trust Fund, and we as housing advocates, and I'm saying we, I'm looking at all y'all, we as housing advocates have that right to share with the housing department how we want those Housing Trust Fund dollars to be spent. The housing department has an annual review process where they seek community feedback, and it doesn't. I think they're really going to lean in more to this virtual environment, but you can also submit comments, and so those Housing Trust Fund dollars often go from the state to different nonprofit organizations, or it can go towards the affordable housing developers. It doesn't necessarily go directly from the state to different jurisdictions. It really just depends on how those funds are administered. But it's the housing department that holds that purse. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, that's a little more clear. I'm just curious because, yeah, I mean, and how does that work in relation to bonds and bond funding? Because that's one of the ways I've thought that we could locally, get some money to our local housing trust funds.
So I was talking about the state housing trust fund, but local jurisdictions, or local areas, I think, and hopefully some of my advocates can help fill my knowledge gap. I think that there's different local housing trust funds as well. So Jim, Liz, help me out.
So Joan, I can say that we actually have, the city has one. We don't have a revenue source for it right now. But we do have a local housing trust fund. And in fact, Phoenix was asking me about ours too. So sounds like Phoenix is looking at it.
Great. And to maybe I'm going to advance a question, and like, how do you get a revenue source? I'll share that like other jurisdictions across the nation have looked at like what are the real estate transaction. In the state of Arizona, we can't do that, but maybe local jurisdictions can. Like, if look at the different, just basically Google how are local housing trust funds resourced, and there might be some different options available.
That actually reminds me, now that I have you on the phone, I've been wanting to ask about, I heard that at the state legislature, the Airbnb luxury tax might be on the table again soon as a potential source, which I think is an excellent idea. Is that moving forward? Where's that at? That's
a political mind right there, or mine right there. Yeah, I mean, ultimately we've, thank you, Jim. You're laughing at me. Honestly, the Airbnb conversation is a conversation that we have not jumped into necessarily, but we know that it's another, just like evictions, ripe for reform. I know that, what is her name? There's a legislator in the Phoenix area that introduced it was a clever title, but it hasn't gone anywhere yet. I'll just share a short answer. There's not the current political appetite for that. Will that change? If you get out and vote, yes, it will.
Okay, and last question. I was on another forum where someone was recommending TIF financing as a potential, and TIF districts as a potential way for us all out of this mess. And we have one. And I actually recently found out that the city of Tucson is the only jurisdiction in the state of Arizona to have one. And how is this a possibility? And are you hearing anything politically about this?
Man, you're challenging me. I love this. Tough questions. So when she mentions TIF, it's tax incremental financing. And now I'm just gonna say I don't know the answer, and I'm hoping some of my housing advocates on the phone might be able to help.
Is that the same thing as a GIPLET?
No, TIF is what finances Rio Nuevo, and we're the only jurisdiction in it. We got one by fluke. Somebody filled me in on the history of this recently, and I was on some housing forum where someone was from Local First Daisy actually was suggesting that TIF financing might be a way, again, because you can basically, like Rio Nuevo, you can create special districts, where and I forget exactly how the tax structure works, but it's not GPLET. It's a different system.
And what are you taxing exactly? Like, who are you taxing? Is it sales tax? Is it
my understanding is the city takes the sales tax revenue for a period of time, 10 or 12 years or whatever the duration is, and they reinvest that into the property as a way of filling a gap. So there's a TIF district that's managed by Rio Nuevo. I believe Chandler also has one.
I remember now. It's the state. We get to defer state taxes, which is why the state doesn't like it and doesn't want to hand any more out.
Okay. Any other questions for Joan before we? Go ahead, Mike.
Mark? Me?
Or Mark, excuse me. Was that you that spoke?
Yes, it was. The TIF district, the way Rio Nuevo is, hi, Joan. The way Rio Nuevo is currently operating, they're only investing money in stuff that's going to increase sales tax revenue. And so trying to sort out exactly how that would work with affordable housing is potentially problematic. I'm not sure. And so that's the deal.
Okay, any other questions for Joan before we let her go? Yes, Mindy.
Can you come back?
Of course. Seeing everyone's face, it's so good. It's like a homecoming. So yes, I'm happy to come back anytime.
Sorry, one last question.
Yeah. Actually, no, not with her. I can't come back with her. She's gonna ask me these really tough questions, and I'm just gonna be like biting my nails. But come on, bring it.
All right, so the state LIHTC, so that though, it seems positive and like there's support for it. Have they said anything at all? Some of us are working on kind of smaller scale incremental development efforts. And again, one of the criticisms of LIHTC is it's not friendly to smaller developers. Is that being addressed at all at the state level?
Well, let's get it passed first, and then ultimately we can address those conversations and kind of the rulemaking and and frankly, we're if passed, a lot of the way it would be implemented, it would be through what's called the Qualified Allocation Plan that the Department of Housing administers for these LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit programs. So I know you know all that, but I'm just kind of repeating that for everybody else who doesn't.
And that QAP would be a separate QAP that would have its own rules?
Nope, the QA, when the Department of Housing has their qualified allocation plan hearing, it would address both the federal LIHTC and the state LIHTC if passed. Knock on wood, fingers crossed, all those things. That wasn't so rough. I'm glad you asked that question.
All right, Corin.
Yeah, thank you, Joan. That was really, really informative. I guess I have a question, which is other states I'm aware of do use private activity bonds to fund affordable housing. I'm just curious why that's not one of the strategies. I'm guessing there's just not that appetite for the debt in Arizona or to use bonds for housing.
No, we do use private activity bonds at the state level. It's just, you have to leverage, again, you just have to leverage everything. You just have to create, to fill that gap. You really frankly need all the tools in the toolbox. So private activity bonds is an option. It's just not leaned into the way I think, it's just not like leaned into the way we really need to. I don't know if I'm a rich source of information. I'm calling on you all to help me out. So.
You're doing great.
All right.
Okay, any final questions? Joan, thank you very much. You're welcome to obviously stay, or if you'd like to, you can go.
I have to take a kid to soccer, so I'll see you all later. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next agenda item is agenda item number 5, the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, and it's going to be led by Corin Manning with the City of Tucson Planning and Development Services Department and Shariah Jimenez. So I'm not sure who is taking lead on that.
Corin, do you want to start? And
I will. Yeah. Sorry, I just started the presentation and lost my Zoom screen. So hold on just a second while I get that up. So I'm going to share a little bit about the accessory dwelling unit project, which was initiated by Mayor and Council last year. And just want to share an update with this commission on what the purpose of this project is, why we're looking at accessory dwelling units as one strategy for creating more affordable housing in Tucson. And then Shariah is going to share a little bit about some of the specific strategies that she's working on around affordability for ADUs. And then we really want to get input from this group. There's a couple kind of big areas that we would like some feedback and hopefully resources and ideas from this group. So some of you might be, so you guys can see my screen now, I hope. Okay. So I'm just going to start with a little bit about what accessory dwelling units are. Or I should first introduce myself and just say hello again, Corin Manning with Planning and Development Services and with the Long Range Planning Team at PDSD. So a little bit about what accessory dwelling units are. Some of you might be very familiar, but if you haven't come across this, ADUs are essentially an independent housing unit that are meant to be accessory to a primary housing unit. So they are kind of independent, self-enclosed in that they have their own kitchen, bathroom, living, sleeping space, but they are connected in some way to a primary unit. They're typically under about 1,000 square feet, and you can see there's a lot of different forms these can take. They can be detached, that's kind of the most classic example of like the backyard casita. They could also be attached to a home, either as an addition or just a remodel, creating a unit within a larger home. In other communities, it's very common to see these as attic or basement renovations, not as common in Tucson, just because that's not a common housing type here to have basements. But what we do see in Tucson is garage conversions, potentially for ADUs. So that's just a little bit about what they are. Why are we looking at accessory dwelling units in Tucson? There's a lot of benefits to this housing type. One is just increasing the supply of affordable rental housing and housing in general, because these units are smaller, often rented by a landlord who's renting to friends or family members. They do tend to be more affordable and often below market rate. This is also a flexible housing option for seniors and people who wish to age in place. We often see people move into an ADU and have family members or caregivers move into the larger unit or vice versa. So in that way, it can support multi-generational households, which we know is really growing, or we see a lot of families choosing that model. It's also a way to provide supplemental income to landowners and in effect promote sort of neighborhood stability, especially neighborhoods that might be under development pressure, areas that are going through a lot of changes, rising values. This is a way to get more value out of your land for sometimes a long time property owners. And then it also supports more climate resilient, sustainable infill development. So it supports development within developed areas of the city We have a lot of backyards with space for ADUs across the city that are on our infrastructure network, on our transit network, et cetera. So can be a really sustainable form of infill. And then it's a way to retain a lot of the neighborhood character while adding more housing. These units are often in the back or a conversion that's pretty low profile and still can match the character of the neighborhood and have minimal impact in that way. So there's a few major policy goals for our mayor and council that this supports. And as I mentioned, a primary one is housing and a way to create more affordable housing. So a lot of this came out of the housing study that was presented to this commission at the last meeting by Dr. Kim. That housing study identified the need for more affordable and workforce housing in our community. Not a surprise, but it gave us a lot of data about those gaps. So ADUs are one way to create more affordable housing. By no means the only strategy we're pursuing, but one that we think could have an impact in Tucson. As well, I mentioned climate issues. So this is in line with the climate emergency declaration of mayor and council last September, is in the sense that ADUs can support more energy efficient housing and infill development. And then our city also signed on to an age-friendly action plan and really wants to support more housing options for older adults and strategies for aging in place. So we've looked at a lot of other cities, and this is something that a lot of cities across the country have taken steps to allow and promote in recent years in order to create more housing options. So we've looked at a number of cities like Flagstaff, Tempe, Portland, Minneapolis. We've also seen that in some cases, entire states have legalized ADUs, including California, New Hampshire, and Oregon. So some of the things that are regulated in these places that have allowed ADUs are the number of units, the maximum unit size, parking, occupancy, a number of those aspects. And then we also see that there is an evolution in a lot of these cities over time. So Portland, Oregon, for example, has updated their code many times over the past few years to allow greater and greater flexibility. As they kind of started off, saw that there were still some barriers in the code. And then as they've taken away more barriers and provided some additional financing, they've really seen development of ADUs take off. And then some of the other tools that cities are using are model plans. So cities in California, a lot of them are doing this as a way to create model plans that match the character of the city. So it's a way of having some consistency and predictability in design, but also it brings down costs for community members. So currently, accessory dwelling units are not a defined term in our Unified Development Code, which is our zoning code. That means that these buildings are not permitted very widely. So the standards for accessory buildings and structures, which would be like a shed or a building, other structures in your backyard, it specifically states that those types of accessory structures should not be a dwelling unit. So what that means is if you want to build a small unit, a 500 square foot unit in your backyard, that is just considered a dwelling unit. And you have to have a large enough lot to build a second dwelling unit. And so that means that really only large sites across the city can legally build an ADU. So it's pretty limited right now where these can be built. So for that reason, Mayor and Council initiated a code amendment in November of last year and gave staff direction to define accessory dwelling units as an allowed use in our code, determine the appropriate zones for this use, and develop standards for what ADUs should look like, the size, things like that. So some of those specific aspects to be regulated are the ADU type and size, meaning attached, detached, those different typologies we looked at before, the size, the overall square footage. So we're looking at a maximum square footage for ADUs, density, lot size requirements, height, lot coverage, all of those kind of dimensional standards, parking requirements. And then as well, we are also looking at the alignment with our building code and fire codes and existing standards around group dwellings, home occupations, and historic districts. We're also potentially looking at doing an amnesty program for existing unpermitted ADUs, as we know there's a lot of units across the city that essentially function as accessory dwelling units, even if they were not permitted that way. So a really key piece of developing this code amendment is community engagement. So we established a stakeholder group based on direction from mayor and council, which has about 40 members, including some of you on this commission who are also part of the ADU group. And that includes affordable housing advocates, senior housing advocates, real estate professionals, and a number of neighborhood associations are also involved. We held a series of public meetings in February, 3 virtual meetings, and we had over 200 community members attend and share a lot of interest and ideas about this potential code amendment. And we also have an online survey that's been going where we've gotten over 60 responses. So there's a lot of interest, and we're working very closely with the stakeholder group on developing this code amendment. So some of what we're hearing is a lot of interest in ADUs as a way of creating affordable housing and promoting aging in place. You know, we've heard a lot of stories from people who would like to build an ADU to care for family members or have been in a caregiving situation where this would have been valuable for them. But we're also hearing concerns about affordable housing and how affordable ADUs can really be. And that's really where we want to continue to build out some of our toolkit as a city in terms of how we can create affordable ADUs. And that's really kind of the feedback that we want from this commission. So this is just to share kind of sort of what we're looking at in terms of code changes. We're basically looking at how we can fit ADUs on some of the existing sites in the city and some of the dimensional requirements around setbacks, height, et cetera. This is what we're kind of working through really closely with our stakeholder group and that team. We've also had a lot of conversation with the stakeholder group about affordability, which we'll get into in a minute. So we know that zoning is not the only barrier to ADU development. That's really what we're working on with the code change, but there's a lot of other aspects that we want to be looking at and kind of problem solving in parallel. So if this code amendment is successful and supported by mayor and council ultimately, we know there's other technical assistance that will be needed more broadly in our community to promote this option. Some of that is lending programs. Financing is a huge issue for developing ADUs. Model plans, as I mentioned before, that's a way to really kind of reduce the barriers to entry for people who, you know, maybe are not familiar with the design process, most of us have not ever designed and built a house before. So it brings down costs, but again, also has other benefits in terms of having styles that match the character of our community. And then assistance with permitting and review, and you know, how to go through the process of getting building permits. So I mentioned before that, you know, ensuring that these ADUs, at least a portion of the ADUs that are built in our community are affordable is one of our big challenges. So ADUs can often cost over $100,000 to build. There was a survey conducted by Freddie Mac that reported the median is about $100,000 to $150,000. We know there's ways to do it much more cost effectively, $50,000 to $70,000 if you do a lot of the construction yourself, things like that. But this is about the median nationwide. So that's a lot to finance for most people. So that's what we really want to think about. How can we create ADUs that are affordable to homeowners as well as renters? So we've started looking at some case studies from other communities that have allowed ADUs and also created programs to support affordability of ADUs. So Lauren Seamus, a planner with HCD and Planning and Development Services, did a little bit of research on this that I want to share with you all just to start generating ideas. So we looked at Austin, Los Angeles, Denver, and then a few cities in California. Again, California, because they have legalized ADUs statewide, there's a lot of innovation happening in different cities in California around accessory dwelling units, affordability programs, model plans, et cetera. So what we found is that many cities have created different kind of support and technical assistance beyond just zoning changes to encourage ADUs. And that's really, it's really done through partnerships with community organizations. That's how the city is able to accomplish these kind of targeted programs and provide financial assistance. So that's what we want to do. And that's our goal, is to start to build some of these community partnerships in Tucson with organizations who want to assist in promoting ADUs and helping with different aspects of ADU development, based on their populations that they're familiar with, that they're used to serving, and what the needs of those groups are. So some of the types of organizations that we have seen very involved in other communities in promoting ADUs are financial institutions, community development organizations, and design professionals and design professional associations. And there's programs targeted at that can be targeted at different populations, homeowners, specific neighborhoods in some cases, and then based on income level or demographics. Some of the services that we see offered are financial assistance, technical assistance, educational information, and kind of just awareness of ADUs as an option, development fee waivers, and model plans. And some of the ways that we see affordability kind of built in, or commitments to affordability, are through CCNRs, compliance reporting to housing authorities or other organizations, and then through the housing choice vouchers. So potential funding sources that we've seen used elsewhere are federal funding, CDBG, Home, Section 8, and private funding through various partnerships. So that's really what we would like feedback and ideas from this group on, and really just resources from this group. So some of the lessons learned from looking at other cities that have allowed ADUs and sought to promote affordable ADUs is, without some targeted thought about promoting ADUs in low and moderate income neighborhoods, the majority of ADU production will take place in areas with high home values and incomes. That's what has happened in California. That's where people have the access to credit and the ability to finance these types of units. In Portland, about 80% of ADUs rent for market rates. What they found is that, it's really the cost of construction, design costs, permitting fees are some of the obstacles to building ADUs. So that's the challenge as we think about promoting this in our city. But some of the solutions or ideas that we see elsewhere is to really tailor our design standards and zoning to make this, to reduce barriers, make this very accessible and an easy process across our city. And then some places have been able to waive development fees. Portland, that was one of the steps they took that really changed how much ADU production they saw, is when they waived development fees, which had a big impact on the bottom line for homeowners. So we've started to look across the country for ideas, and we've also started to develop partnerships locally to implement some of these ideas. And Sharia has started actually to put together a program that will include technical assistance for low and moderate income homeowners, and planning and development services in the housing and community development departments are collaborating with this effort with Sharia and the Pima Community Land Trust. And Sharia, do you want to go ahead and share a little bit about your program?
Yeah,
I guess if there's any questions first on the zoning side, happy to answer those.
Thank you, Corin. I appreciate the presentation.
I have a question.
I actually have a couple of quick questions. Who is that?
This is Jay. I have questions too after you, Jim.
Okay.
I have questions also after Jay.
I have a first one's an easy one. Assuming this is just for R1 zoning, not R2. Is that correct?
It's not just for R1 zoning. That's one of the districts where I think it'll be the biggest change, because there's a large lot size requirement in R1 and in R1. But we do see it as really any of our districts, or we're looking at all the districts that allow residential. We haven't created a specific proposal on what districts will be included, but we are seeing that R1 will have the biggest impact. I mean, simply because R1 is our most common zoning district in the city.
Yeah.
By far, and is one of the most difficult districts to build accessory dwelling units today.
So this seems like a good idea to me. So what resistance are you getting? And is there going to be a provision to keep those from being short-term rentals like Airbnbs and VRBOs?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that is one of the concerns we hear. Absolutely, is, you know, would this just be a way to promote Airbnb? Going back to the presentation earlier, we're actually prohibited at the local level from restricting short-term rentals. So we can't restrict Airbnb or other short-term rentals locally beyond, you know, having a registry of rentals, which we have. And then there are concerns about the impact this will have on existing neighborhoods. So I mentioned before, we have a stakeholder group of about 40 members, and we've held some public meetings, and we've heard a range of perspectives. I would say a lot of the concerns are about impact in the neighborhoods in terms of parking, and, you know, just sort of like infrastructure in the neighborhood. And then I would say the neighborhoods that are close to the university have kind of their own set of considerations and concerns about student housing, and, you know, whether ADUs would bring more students to their neighborhood and bring some of the impacts along with that.
Thank you. Vicky, you want to go first?
Oh, thanks. I have a question. As you're looking at this, are you looking at Tucson's Visitability Ordinance? I believe it's called the Inclusive Home Design Ordinance, because in fact, the picture that you're showing now is not visitable and would not comply with that ordinance. And you mentioned, you know, this could be really important for people who become caregivers. And so thinking about that and allowing people to age in place, I think that's why we have the Inclusive Home Design Ordinance. There's one in Tucson, the city of Tucson, as well as Pima County, and we were some of the first in the country. So I don't want to lose sight of that. And so I'm concerned that these follow that ordinance and be built in a way that follow at least the visitability guidelines. And those basics are a 0-step entrance, at least a powder room on the first floor, which I realize in Arizona, we mostly have 1-floor homes. And then it's also the doorways that are specific width. So the idea is that even if you yourself are not disabled, your home would be visitable by somebody who is. And seeing that those of us, if you don't already have a disability, the chances that you will age into one are really great. If you look around, like, disability is a natural part of the life experience. And so my focus is on keeping people in their homes. So if we build homes in a way that don't have those barriers to begin with, I can say, like, we do home modification projects all the time. And if homes actually followed the visitability guidelines at a minimum, we would do far less home modifications. It's a lot cheaper to do it up front than to remove the barriers later.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the goals here, is to make these very friendly for people who want to age in place. So yeah, we don't, I'm not that familiar with the visitability requirements, so I will be reviewing that, but we definitely these would be in line with any current building codes and things like that. So we're not planning changes to building codes. So as much as that standard applies to new residential today, that would be true for accessory dwelling units.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I've been doing residential permits, and you have to put that language on any permit. So anything that's getting permitted is gonna follow those standards.
Great, thanks, Shreya.
Sorry, Liz, do you want to go next?
Olga has her hand.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could clarify what kind of parking requirements are being expected of people who do develop ADUs, or who may go through like whatever certification process there is for existing ADUs on their property.
Yeah, good question. So that's actually something we discussed just recently with the stakeholder group. And again, so just to clarify for the commission, we haven't developed a specific code proposal yet. We're still working with the stakeholder group to develop a code proposal. I definitely will be returning to this commission to share a more specific proposal when we have one in a couple months. Parking is definitely a big topic because it can be a barrier if you're in an area where it's hard to add parking, or your lot, it's hard to add additional parking. So we're trying to balance that with other issues, like some neighborhoods do have real constraints around parking and don't have a lot of on-street parking, for example. So that's what we're trying to balance in terms of what the required parking will be.
Is there going to be anything in the ordinance about people having a ability to report or complain to the city about existing ADUs that are not registered?
So there is a code enforcement process today, even for unregistered or unpermitted ADUs. So that would be a code enforcement issue. And we do get those calls on occasion from neighbors and homeowners who are concerned that there is more units than permitted on a lot, and those do get investigated by code enforcement.
Is there going to be any sort of like protective process for people who maybe don't have the funds to maybe get their ADU in compliance with the expectations of the city or anything like that? I just have concerns about folks who maybe have existing ADUs before the ordinance and then aren't able to meet the code expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what we want to discuss with this commission and get feedback on, is like, where should we target funds if we have funds? Should it be new construction? Should it be renovating existing units? Both. I think that there's ways that renovating an existing unpermitted ADU can be very cost effective. I think that could be within the scope of what we would want, where we'd want to target funds.
Okay. And one last question. I know I asked a lot of questions. One last question I do have is there any consideration for looking at zoning and the possibility of breaking up existing zoning so that home ownership could be a possibility for people who want to own ADUs? Especially, the reason I bring this up is because of things like whatever that equal equity is, and also like the housing choice voucher program for like future home ownership, things like that.
Yeah, you're saying sort of like purchase your ADU or like a tiny house on a small lot and separate the ADU actually from the primary unit.
Correct.
That's one arrangement that could actually, it could be complicated because of lot size requirements and things like that. But it's certainly an interesting model. I mean, it could be a condo arrangement or something like that. There's definitely things to explore in terms of like, there's even some tiny home villages where ownership might be part of it, or some sort of limited equity ownership. So I think there's a lot of models out there that that folks, community organizations could look into.
Is that something that's being considered for this ordinance?
So we're not really looking at changes to, so one thing that gets brought up sometimes is like just lot size requirements in general, and whether it is something we should look at in terms of reducing our minimum lot size standards. That hasn't been something we've really focused on at this time. It's really a focus on how to create an additional unit on a lot that already has a primary unit. And what I hear you saying is more, how can we make that smaller unit the primary one on a site, like maybe a 3,000 square foot site with a small 1,000 square foot or less unit? Is that kind of what you're saying, like small lot home ownership?
I'm just wondering if if the ownership is permittable, is like something that would be permitted on that lot. Is that something that would be permitted?
So usually the homeowner owns the primary unit and it's one lot. So that's mostly what we're looking at, is where the ADU is part of an existing lot. So it's one owner for the primary unit and accessory unit. To have different owners, you would have to either do a condo or a lot split. And you'd have to meet all the legal requirements for that lot split or condo arrangement.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. I didn't know that.
But those are, I mean, I think what you're saying is, or what I kind of hear a little bit is like more innovative or flexible arrangements for home ownership and rentals and things like that. And I think that's kind of a bigger conversation that we definitely hear a lot of interest in. There was a lot of discussion about that at the Affordable Housing Summit in January, kind of different co-housing models and different ownership models. So I think there's definitely interest in that conversation.
Okay, from a time perspective, we're running about 15 minutes over. I think this is a good topic. There's a lot of interest, so I want to keep the conversation going for a little bit. We're going to try to catch up on the next agenda item. I have 4 more people, I think, who would like to ask questions. So first we'll start with Mindy.
Thank you. Is there a way, legally, is there a way to incentivize people to build ADUs and have them specifically allocated for Section 8?
Yeah, I think there are ways to do that. Some of those incentives might not be in zoning, but they might be financial incentives or expedited development review. And things like that. So yeah, that's absolutely something that we're looking at is, what type of fee waivers or things could be used to incentivize, using ADUs to rent to lower income or formerly homeless households or Section 8 voucher holders. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Olga.
Hi, so my question is, when you say you need some advice from the commission as well as community organizations and financial institutions, could you explain a little bit more what you mean by financial institutions? And in my being a lender, I'm thinking, okay, if we can target people that live in lower to moderate or underserved areas, incentivize them to want to get maybe some type of incentive to make their home into this. Have you had any discussion on this with these people, with these lenders? And have they spoken about the possible maybe grants you can do if they qualify maybe for a loan, something of that nature? Have you guys even gone into that type of discussion yet?
So we haven't had a lot of discussion with lenders yet. I did share an update on this with the Tucson Industrial Development Authority, the IDA, recently, and they have some of those connections as well. So we hope to get more resources potentially there, but we really haven't. And actually, I think this is a good transition to Sharea's piece because she's thought a lot about that, and that's something that we want to do. Is kind of do almost like a focus group or something with lenders, because that's really one of the hugest issues is the ability to get financing for these units.
Well, one thing is if going back to if it's an ADU, it can only be an ADU if you get a certain type of loan program for it, and you can't change it into something else because then it's no longer considered an ADU. So then you're kind of going out of there. So I'm just interested, put it out there as far as a portfolio program. That's just what I want to put out there. And I would love to be part of any other discussion on this because
that would be great. Thank you, Olga.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention real quickly. So should I go ahead and present? And thank you so much, Olga, because that's exactly where my mind is headed. And
oh, nice.
Again, I'll just share my project really quickly. Can I share my screen here? Let's see. So let's see. Okay, so screen share. All right, so can you all see this? Can you see this now?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see, view full page. Okay, so shoot. Okay, basically, we've partnered myself, Quadro LLC. I've partnered with the Community Land Trust and the Vitalist Foundation, and we went after a large grant. We have received notice of award. We're not mentioning it super publicly yet because they're still working on drafting a press release, but we did receive the funding, so we can basically move forward and start again. And that's partly why we're here, me and Corin here today, to kind of start this outreach, especially with financial institutions. That's kind of one of the first ones on my mind. The Vitalist Foundation, they're focused on health equity, affordable housing being kind of one of their agendas. And we wrote the grant in a ways that we're looking at this potential as a tool to combat gentrification by allowing homeowners to generate some income and stay in their homes. Multi-generational housing we've already talked about, and then just overall increasing the housing supply, and potentially social and cultural cohesion through creating mixed income neighborhoods. And we're seeing this in some cities like LA, which were already mentioned, where again, these higher income households that can afford to build these units are also given incentives so that they can also house, and in exchange for those incentives, they're expected to have a commitment to house someone from Section 8 for like 5 years. And that's a really, really cool thing, because we all know of the barriers and the stigmas for people even wanting to rent to Section 8, and again, just increases potential options. So in our grant tasks are, outreach and community engagement first, and then we're doing some digital storytelling with getting some of these early adopters, following their story. What were the barriers? What were the challenges? What needs to be changed as we move through working on this ordinance? And then focus groups. So we potentially have some stipend money for either, definitely for being more inclusive of the low to moderate income homeowners, and seeing because those are going to be some unique challenges. Again, I think the financing is the key barrier there, where you might be you might in some cases be borrowing more on the property than the property is worth, and that's going to be a real challenge. But you have this potential value. So again, it's going to be risky. It's going to be perceived as risky, I think, to a lot of lenders. And then potentially we're doing some workforce development with mobilizing small and local builders and tradespeople. We've already talked about, we committed maybe to potentially doing some pre-approved plans, and then a resource website or pamphlets or somewhere to house all this information that gives a clear step-by-step process for a homeowner. Because as Corin mentioned, kind of the biggest barrier to all of this is you're having to quickly train and educate homeowners on how to be developers. And there's a huge learning curve. There's just so many steps and so many pieces. We're really going to need that support for folks in the beginning. So my project that I have is in Barrio Blue Moon. I own a lot there. I rent this lot and I rent below market rate, and I've been doing it for a while and finding a way to make the numbers work on my own private equity at my own financial risk without any incentive. So it is possible, and people are still doing it. So my lot is zoned for R2, so technically I have the underlying zoning, but there are some challenges. Right now, I've started to present this kind of concept and project to lenders where, I already have an existing casita that's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and I want that to stay affordable, but I want to build a bigger unit in the back that I would live in, and that would be my primary residence. So But the issue that I have is that the lenders won't, these detached units I'm finding are actually harder to finance than an attached unit. They're willing to do the deal if I make it a duplex, but they said that for them to do a detached unit like this, they would need a lot split. And again, and I'm at the minimum lot, I'm close to the minimum lot size. So I'm really interested in potentially exploring revisiting minimum lot sizes and how we could, again, and in conjunction with what Liz was mentioning, I didn't even consider that, but yes, as a potential even for home ownership, and how do you go from the next step from being a renter to a homeowner again. But it would have to be a huge change to the zoning, because you'd have to basically reevaluate minimum lot sizes across the board. So again, I think I can find creative ways around this for now, and I'm again still talking and going to be shopping around with different other lenders, but these are some of the challenges I've faced so far, and that I imagine other people will be facing, where again, in my particular case, because I'm trying to build bigger than what's already there, it is presenting some problems. So, and again, this is the before and after of the home that I already renovated. I've already, in my mind, more or less renovated it. I don't want to spend any more money on it. I've already, again, kind of like maxed out, again, to keep it affordable, I can't really put more money in it. And this is the problem that every developer faces, it's your cost versus what rents you're able to charge. And so again, this is kind of the 3D of that, the plans, and then some pretty pictures. But again, as I'm going through this and trying to figure out how to get these projects done and off the ground, there's a lot of challenges, and the biggest one I think is the financing. So that's all I'll share for now.
Okay, thank you. Jay, did you have a question?
I did, but they were mostly answered, and in the interest of time, I will pass.
Okay. Any final comments or questions before we move to the next agenda item?
I believe real quick, Jim, for me, Corin, are we going to be able to get a copy of your presentation as well as your Sharia?
Sure, I'd be happy to share that.
Okay. And Corin, when you were talking about the housing study, were you also considering the gap analysis, or no? Is that something different?
Yes,
Okay.
the gap analysis is part of the housing study. I think, last time when Alicia presented, that piece may not have been fully built out on the website, but that has been completed.
Okay, well, Corin and Shariah, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's a great proposal. I support it. If for no other reason, it's going to help limit sprawl in our city, and is going to have less wear and tear on the infrastructure. And, frankly, transportation is becoming a larger issue in terms of cost of living and affordability. So I think it's a great thing you're doing. I'm actually, prior to this, I didn't realize that it was not possible, because I know so many homes that already exist with additional dwelling units. So it's probably good to make it happen. If there's anything you need from us, please let us know. So with that, I'd like to move to agenda item number 6, the commission goals and priorities. And we're going to start with Liz reviewing our mission. And basically what we were thinking here is we'd like to have an open dialogue about how do we define success for this group. It is a new group, and all of us are coming from different backgrounds with different priorities. And I don't think it's totally clear on what tangible deliverables we have and action items. And so I don't know that we're going to finalize this, but I'd like to start the discussion today in terms of reviewing our goals and priorities and get everybody thinking about where do we want this commission to go and how do we define success? Because we're all busy professionals and our time is valuable. And I want to make sure, me being on the previous Metropolitan Housing Commission, the last year of that commission, we felt a little lost. We didn't have real clear direction on what we wanted to do and how we were going to define success, and it ended up basically just going away. So, I don't want to see that happen again, and so I want to start that discussion and try to prioritize our focus areas. So, Liz, do you want to review our mission?
Yes, can you hear me okay? Hi, everyone. I just wanted to make sure I give Ann the maximum amount of time. I don't know how many of you in the link. I think it would be helpful if all of you open the link that takes to the page for the commission and open up the item that's called the ordinance. I'm going to make sure I know how it's under resources. It's called Mayor and Council Ordinance, creating the CEHD, which is the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. It will help, and I know Ann's going to go through it, but down on page, the 5th page of the document, it starts on the functions, purposes, powers, and duties. So I'm going to ask you just to have that handy, look at that, and then see if that helps connect the dots when Ann is going through her portion. Are you okay with that, Ann, or do you want me to read?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks. I saw Joe posted the link to the ordinance directly. And so, Jim, I know that I'll keep this brief, but we did want to ground the conversation in the ordinance. And so thanks, Liz, for referring people to the ordinance. Just as a reminder, I did put the link to the commission website in the chat. People asking for presentations for today, as soon as I get them, we'll upload those to that website. And I try to keep, whenever I get information that I think will be helpful to the commission, we try to post it to that website. I think today's meeting was really helpful in terms of providing examples to help the commission in terms of thinking about goals and priorities. I have a couple slides again to help kind of ground the conversation with the ordinance that Mayor and Council adopted in terms of the founding legislation for the commission. So as Liz pointed out, there is this ordinance. Mike, I think he and I have talked about how the legalese with the ordinance language can get a little bit confusing. And so what I'm trying to do today is really distill down the most important points in that ordinance in terms of providing you direction. So in the ordinance, Mayor and Council established 5 focus areas. Obviously, they're interrelated, and I think this is going to be a challenge as we move forward in terms of trying to separate out work. All of these things are so important and work together. So 5 focus areas. These weren't defined in the ordinance, and I bring this up, the words that are here is my interpretation to get you thinking about what types of things fall into those focus areas. My thinking here is the focus areas are really the big picture canvas that this commission is working within. So I'll talk a little more about maybe thinking about goals and priorities and how you can structure it. But I would think as you're making recommendations, so let's talk about the ADU ordinance. If the commission decides at some point they want to submit a letter of support or provide formal recommendations to Corin, I think it might be worth looking at the focus areas and making sure your recommendation touches on the key important points within those focus areas. So that was just me thinking how the focus areas can help you. The second major thing that the ordinance outlines that's relevant to your goals and priorities is the mission. And if you're actually looking at the ordinance, there's a lot more information there than I provided here, but here is just a distilling it to 5 key things that were identified as part of the mission. Again, I think that these are interrelated and overlap a little bit with the functions. But I think this is another type of area where as you're making recommendations and you're thinking about the steps and actions of the commission, checking it and making sure that whatever you're recommending or putting forth there advances these mission areas is part of how I would approach that. What I really wanted to focus on today, what I think is kind of the most clear direction in the ordinance, is the functions. And so I thought that it might be helpful to go through these briefly and talk about how they might inform your work. And we actually have an interactive piece to this item. And so we'll talk more about that in a second. So in the ordinance are 5 key functions five key functions for the commission. And I think this really could help you in terms of thinking about what your goals and priorities are for the future. So the first one really talks about data and really using the quantitative data that we have been talking about, and we presented on the housing market study last time, and there's a slew of other resources, but this can also be qualitative data too. So many of you are representing different stakeholder groups on this commission, and you have a perspective that's really important. And so people's lived experience is part of this. And so this function area is really thinking about how the data can inform, how you can start to inform the rest of the work the commission does and inform the work that the city takes in these areas. And so here is an example. We had the housing market study conversation last month. There's a ton of information coming out of that housing market study. How can that information inform what this commission does moving forward? So that's one example of a function area. The second one is to identify innovative best practices or new ideas for developing low cost and more affordable housing, as well as preventing and mitigating involuntary displacement. So this function area, I was thinking about my own research, and many of you attended the summit for older adults in affordable housing, and there was a lot of innovative ideas generated there. Some of them Tucson's experimenting with, some of them Tucson isn't yet. But this function area, I would say things like tiny home villages. I saw Ariel on the call earlier. She's been working a lot for Ward 6 on thinking about manufactured homes and bringing down the cost of affordable housing and potentially providing some more housing options. So there are a bunch of different innovative ideas that this commission can help advance. Third area is looking at new capital resources, and or I would say potentially looking at barriers to what those new capital resources are. So Sharia, you mentioned the TIF district in Rio Nuevo. My understanding there, and I'm certainly no expert, but the way that legislation has been written right now may prohibit it, but this commission could work on.
Wanna go for a walk?
I think that we might need to mute. So so that's an idea of, I know Sharia and others have mentioned potentially passing a bond. Some other cities I know have done that in terms of funding to help advance affordable housing units. The city, as Liz mentioned earlier, does have a housing trust fund. There's a little bit of money in it, but we don't have a revenue source for that for moving forward. So I think this commission could play a big role in thinking about how to bring new capital for affordable housing and for homelessness programs. Function area 4 is identify and work toward eliminating institutional and regulatory barriers to affordable housing and job security. So I think that within this area, some of the things we've seen some other cities do is looking at potential zoning changes and or incentives. So the Sunshine Mile, we're going to try our first density bonus on that. And there's the opportunity to do that in other parts of town. Austin's Affordability Unlocked Ordinance, I think, is something that we could really look at in the future. That is a citywide ordinance that if they commit to at least half of the units in a new residential development being affordable, they get some serious, they get financial waivers, impact fee waiver, there's a potential there, parking waivers. So there's a lot of, and more density. So those are the types of things that I think this commission can review and potentially make recommendations on. And then last, I'll say this one's a little bit unique in that it's more, I think, the responsibility of housing and community development, and Liz and I are up for this task in terms of making sure that we keep you updated and ask for your help in terms of this, but this is about the HUD entitlement programs and the HUD, the public housing side, and really getting your input and including you when decisions are made that impact those areas. And so, so that is a little bit, I'd say, of a crash course in interpreting the ordinance and thinking about how it might help this commission in terms of moving forward. I'll also say, I've worked, as I mentioned before, with a lot of commissions, and I know that some have created work plans in terms of advancing certain things. What we do want to do, I do see a hand, and Jim, we can take questions, but while we're taking questions, I do have a ask for the commission members. So Rachel has in the chat put a link to 2 survey questions for each of the commission members, both the voting and the non-voting. And what we want to do to help you all in thinking about this conversation is to survey the group. And so the first question is really around which function areas you think are most important. And then the second question we'll talk about in a second. But please try to find Rachel's chat where she sent you a link, and please help fill out question number 1. And in a second, we'll have Jeremiah Dean, who's helping here at Housing Community Development. We'll have him share his screen and you'll be able to see the real-time results of that. Okay, Jim, did you want to take questions now?
Sure, go ahead, Liz.
How far are we into the HUD 5-year plan, and also how can we participate in giving input without interfering with TPC?
Yeah, good question. So we are in the first year of the HUD consolidated plan still. And so right now, and this is something that Liz is going to mention in terms of the updates, right now we have a public comment period for the annual action plan for year 2 of the 5-year plan. So that's where we're there. And as I said, I will definitely, as we move along, I will think of opportunities to get feedback from this commission. So one example, and really appreciate the folks that were able to help on the scoring committees for the PCHIP call for projects. Those PCHIP call for projects are included into the annual action plan to meet the goals of the consolidated plan. So those are types of examples on how we will, that one I see is a little bit different in that it's so prescriptive in terms of what HUD requires. So we'll be sure when we can to ask you for help and input. All right, how are we doing in terms of taking the survey? And Jeremiah, do you want to share your screen? And the goal here is just to help inform the conversation from here, so you know what the members are thinking.
Okay, so I'm sharing now. Is everybody able to see?
Yeah.
So you'll be able to see a graph down here at the bottom, and this is showing for each function the number of respondents who marked it as a first choice is the dark orange, second choice is light orange, third choice is the gray, and fourth choice is light blue, and then the last choice is a dark blue. So you'll be able to see out of each, for each function, how many of the respondents selected number 1 is a first choice, second choice, and then third choice, and then so on and so forth for each of the functions going down 1 through 5. So far, there are 8 responses that have come in. I can refresh my screen here and just see if any more have come. So we're at 8 right now.
All right, and for time's sake, I would say we'll pause on doing the second survey question, because that's more getting at individual preferences and kind of what areas you'd be interested in serving on. But I think for now, looking at, it looks like of the 8 that responded, there's a lot more on the commission. So hopefully we'll get folks answering this question to inform it. But it looks like so far, some of the highest ranking orders are function function 2, which is to identify the innovative best practices to support low cost and more affordable housing and help to mitigate involuntary displacement. And the second one is surprising. I mean, I love data, but it is the data one on reviewing data and in really thinking about how to inform recommendations in the 5 focus areas. So, and what we can do is make sure that all commission members get the survey to inform future meetings. And then we can also, the second question, as I said, was around individual preferences, if that's helpful. But I think at this point, I'll turn it over to Jim to lead kind of where you go from here.
Okay, so thank you for that. So I guess I'd like to open it up for comments. In light of what we've just seen. Olga, you want to go first?
Sure, thank you. One thing I would like to address is inventory and affordability. A comment I wanted to let you guys know just really quickly is 2 weeks ago, there were 14 houses in all of Pima County that were from the amount of $250,000 to $300,000. To give you an example, I'm more of a community lender. I have about 25 people looking for a home that are under $250,000. I spoke to a realtor less than a week ago and told me that there was an investor that wanted to buy the listing she had, and that he was tasked with $2 million to buy 30 homes in Tucson. Every agent that I am speaking to is getting offers, cash offers, or 20,000 and above offers on these lower priced homes that these hardworking, low to moderate to middle people really deserve and are looking for, and they're getting bought out by investors. I would like to bring out something to help with one, inventory, but also new inventory and incentives for builders to create more housing, new housing, good housing, and incentives for people that own land. I've spoken to realtors and agents that have told me, I know people that own land between 36 and E Mountain, but they're only going to let it go if it's for something affordable. So, hey, well, let's get involved. How can we, and I don't have all the answers, but I would love, this is a passion of mine, that I would love to figure out how I can get my middle America people into a home. My hardworking people that are in the service industry and that really deserve this, to help them create more wealth for themselves. And they're not able to because a lot of people are sending their assistants to come purchase homes with a lot of money. And so I don't want to repeat myself, but this is something that I feel is definitely a need. I've spoken to a lot of people in the industry, in the for-profit world, and it's a problem. And it's not going to get better. I moved from San Diego and I lived in Chula Vista, which is very similar to Tucson. And the same thing happened there. And it's not getting better. And if we don't do something now, then we are going to be another San Diego. And it's not going to be pretty. And I hope to God we can do something about it as a commission and recommend to this to mayor and council. And I'm willing to help with a committee because I know there are other things that need to be discussed about homelessness, and I get that. I just want this also to be something as well. Thank you.
Okay, that's a good comment. Liz?
Just back to the actual ordinance and the commission, I really appreciate what Olga had to say, but back to the ordinance and the commission itself, I just wanted to address the open seat and talk about, I spoke to Anne, who communicated with Liz, and I was made aware that the open seat actually is for a member of South Tucson, and they haven't participated in any meetings. So I just wanted to make a motion for that seat actually to, I don't know if I need to make a motion or not, but see if we could get consensus on us making a recommendation to mayor and council to amend the ordinance so that that seat actually could be allocated to a member of Tucson's youth. We have no representation of any members of Tucson's youth. I think we need a voice from the community, maybe ages 18 to 24. We did just get the Youth Homeless Demonstration Grant, and we're working on, solving youth homelessness right now. I think that the pandemic has really impacted Tucson's youth really disproportionately. So I'd really like us to consider asking that.
Okay. So you've made a motion. Ann and Liz, can you help me with this? Are we able to take a motion at this point? The point of order?
I mean, if I would say in terms of this agenda item, being clear that it's linked to future goals and priorities and the need to have, representation that the commission is happy with. So I'd say it's related enough. One thing I know you've made a motion, and if to have discussion, somebody should probably second it. One thing I'll say, Liz, is so South Tucson has communicated that they are interested in participating. I think that as the new housing director is getting caught up, that there's a question whether it's going to be her or the city manager. So I offer that perhaps it's rather than replace, it's potentially add, because I do think they could be a potentially important stakeholder too.
Okay, so if I could restate the motion, Liz, the motion is to add an additional voting member to the commission with somebody who can fill the need of, or the fill, how do you want to say it? Somebody with a focus on our youth.
Tucson's youth, yeah, ages 18 to 24.
Okay, so is there a second to that motion?
Is there a potential for more discussion? When would the discussion take place?
As soon as we have a second, we'll open it up to comments. Okay, Mindy seconded it. So I'd like to open it up for comments. Jay, go ahead.
I'm all for more representation. I think that's a great idea. I guess what I'm concerned about is, having been on commissions in the past, I think, getting people to agree to do it and to be on the commission is always an issue. So I'm concerned about the potential for making it a little bit harder for quorum. So I guess I'm not saying I'm not in favor of this totally, but I'm just wondering, do we have an idea of who we would tap? Do we have folks who might be interested? If we make this position, is it gonna, in the meantime, make it more difficult to achieve a quorum? So I'm just wondering logistically about how this would work, and if it would actually at this point maybe make it a little bit more difficult to do our work. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but wanted to throw some of those logistics out.
I do know that there already is an entire board devoted to the Youth Action Committee with Tucson Pima Collaboration to End Homelessness. So there already are youth advocates in housing that feel very passionately about self-advocacy and advocating for youth representation in housing. So I don't think that identifying someone to participate in the commission would be difficult.
So just to kind of tack on with what Jay said, I guess the other option, if we want to add a member, is to add a member as a ex officio member, which is not a voting member. And then that person would not necessarily have voting rights, but they would have every ability to speak their opinion and participate in these discussions. Liz, did you have a comment?
So this Liz, right, Jim?
Yes.
No, I was just going to say the same thing as Jay. If there is concerns about quorum, that is an option as well as the ex officio.
If we started with an ex officio, could we then, if we wanted to make that ex officio position then a voting position, if we got somebody on the commission and they wanted to become a voting member, would that be possible?
it would probably require an amendment from mayor and council to the original motion that they passed to form this commission. Is that correct?
But aren't we already kind of
And
doing
we'll-
that anyway? I mean,
Yeah, I'm thinking one possibility, I think I get where you're going, Jay. I think one possibility is if you're asking them to amend once, in that amendment, you can ask that the commission elevate them, you know, by vote of the commission in the future, you could potentially elevate them. So only have to do an amendment once, I think. I'd have to confirm, but that could be a possibility.
And can I ask a
Okay,
question?
Liz
I'm sorry.
Wilson, go ahead.
I'd really like to challenge us to not make this member ex officio. I think that it's not respectful of youth's autonomy, their voices. Like, the purpose of having youth participate, in my opinion, is to get their input and to have them participate fully as members of our community and as stakeholders. We're creating this specific representation because they are community stakeholders and because they're youth voices specifically.
Okay, Liz Morales.
I just wanted to ask Anne about, I know we usually try to have commissions, voting members be odd numbers. Is that create an issue? I'm just curious.
I think the main, I think quorum, so if there are 10 voting members, I think you would need 6 for quorum, is my understanding. And then the other challenge with odd numbers is potentially having split votes. But in those cases, that motion would then not go forward.
Okay, any other comments on this motion before we put it to question?
I do. And this is just the multimedia person in me. I know you said 18, Liz, you said 18 to 24. I'm used to the numbers 18 to 34. Is there a reason we should not go higher?
18 to 24 is considered youth both psychosocially and then also in terms of housing. When someone qualifies for youth housing, it's 18 to 24.
Okay. And for Liz and Ann, the South Tucson position, is that EXO? It is.
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions before we put this to vote? Okay, I'm going to go through and do a roll call. Mike Edmonds.
Aye.
Olga Flores.
Aye.
Sharia Jimenez.
Aye.
Monica Lane.
Aye.
Liz Wildschin.
Aye.
Jay Young.
aye.
Mindy Bernstein. Is Mindy here?
Yep, right here.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Mindy.
I'm sorry, I am a bit confused. Are we voting for the ex officio or to bring this person on as an amendment?
Yeah, the motion is to add a voting member to the commission that represent our youth.
Yes, aye.
Okay, and then Lori is absent, so the ayes have it and the motion carries. Okay, going back to the agenda item. In terms of, so my concern, and the reason I wanted to have this as an agenda item, is I really want to try to establish tangible goals and success criteria. And you know, one of the thoughts that I had about things that we could do is one of the action items, I believe, is a quarterly report to mayor and council on our findings and what we're doing. And so one thought that I had is, instead of doing a quarterly report, it would be nice if we had face-to-faces with each council member where maybe we split up the mayor and council members between the commission members, and it could be a two-way discussion where we hear from them, what are their concerns, and we talk about, what we're seeing, and, each quarter kind of give them our list of these are our hot buttons on what we see are potential issues and things that the city of Tucson can do to develop more affordable housing and help with some of the equity issues. So I guess I'd like to put it out to the group on what everyone's thoughts are on doing something like that. Mindy, go ahead.
I'm finding myself feeling an urgency to get work done, things started. And quarterly meetings seem a bit spread out. If we're going to really influence or have a place where the mayor and council is going to be listening to us, I would say monthly. There's so much work that needs to get done and so many ideas that we still need to tease out. Is we are the ones, this commission was formed so that we would advise and give input to mayor and council. And in order to do that, one, I think we need to meet more frequently than once a month. And two, I think once a quarterly meeting might be sufficient. I'm happy to meet with mayor and council, but I'm more eager to get some work done. Thank you.
The only reason I thought quarterly is that was the feedback that they gave us, is that they would like to have a quarterly report. I know their time is valuable as well. We have 2 hours together as a group per month, and I want to make sure that the discussions with mayor and council will not be stale and we'll be rehashing the same things. So if we do a quarterly report, it really gives us an opportunity to kind of get, I don't want to say everybody on the same page. I don't think that's ever going to happen, but we could talk about, 2 or 3 or 5, whatever talking points, so that there's some consistency across the discussions, because all of us are not going to be at each meeting. I think it would be good to separate it out where we have 1 to 2 commission members per council member. And it would be really interesting from my perspective to hear what they have to say as well. Liz Morales. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Mindy, I was just going to address your comment. I appreciate the sense of urgency. I felt that. I think for most people that have been able to share in the last 2 meetings that we've had. So I share your sense of urgency. Again, I think the quarterly is really just about talking to mayor and council is what I'm hearing from Jim, not so much the work that you guys are doing as a commission. The only other thing I was going to suggest is I still would like to see a written report, which the staff can do as a result of what has come out of the meeting so far and the direction you're going in. And we can share that. So when you do meet with the mayor, council members, you can have that report with you to help as a guide as well.
Shreya?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think this is a good plan, Jim. I think it makes sense, and I think that, again, in the idea of like trying to expedite, especially policy, and having the council's ear like that is going to be helpful. For me personally, with all this, in the brief survey we took, I was kind of surprised that I didn't see funding as a key goal, because to me, like, with housing, it just comes down to the numbers. Like, none of this is real, or we can policy till the day's done, but without money to fund any of this, none of these ideas are going anywhere. And so for me, the sense of urgency is money. And how do we get that money unlocked or unleashed or allocated, or how do we get a permanent source of funding for the trust fund? I've asked this in every commission I've been in, I've been asking this question and have had no tangible results or answers. And so again, that's my priority, and I'd be happy to join a subcommittee, and maybe that's where we can, divide our time also more effectively, is to get into subcommittees where some of us can focus on what we all are equally passionate about, because we're going to be passionate about it.
Short on time here. So I'm going to I want to make a couple more comments, and we're going to try to wrap up this topic. So Shariah, I agree with you. Funding is a key to developing affordable housing. On the list of functions, I actually ranked the eliminating institutional and regulatory barriers as my top option, and the reason, or the top goal, and the reason I did that was, I've learned that the easier it is to do business, the easier it is to do development, the more development is going to occur. And as a point of example, the city of Santa Fe, about 15 years ago, put in a regulation that every single new multifamily housing project built had to have an affordability component. So I don't know what the exact number was, 5 or 10% of the units had to be earmarked for affordable housing. And the net result was it made it really, really difficult for any projects to pencil out. And so nobody built anything. Construction stopped and housing became less affordable. So while something like that seems good, there's always, I would say, ancillary ramifications or unintended consequences for things like that. And I've just found that if there are things that we can do and recommendations that we can make that are going to make it easier for people to do development in Tucson, we're going to see more development here, and that's going to help with the affordability component. This last week, the biggest affordable funding source is a low-income housing tax credit, which Joan talked about a little bit. It's an annual process that occurs with the state. Applications were due April 1st, and they came out last week with the list of applications. I think there were 17 applications submitted in total. And I ranked them based on their self-scores. Right now, it looks like Tucson's going to get one project. The city of Phoenix, I think it's one project with about 80 units. The city of Phoenix looks like they're going to get, I think, 6 or 7 projects totaling over 600 apartments. And I want to see us compete with Phoenix. And it's not for selfish reasons, because most of my business is in Phoenix. So I'm very, I just want to see Tucson compete with Phoenix. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do to set ourselves up going forward to do a better job competing with the other cities and jurisdictions in the state to get at least our fair share. Because this last year, we're not. There were 4 applications submitted within the city of Tucson limits, and it looks like only one's going to get an award. I'd like to see us get up to 2 to 3 or more projects each year. And I think that is a tangible goal that we can achieve that will have, long-lasting benefits in our community. Jay?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm sitting here thinking, particularly after Anne's presentation, and, I guess I'm just really feeling overwhelmed in a lot of ways. Those 5 priorities, I think, are what an entire department with the city drills down on and figures out how to deal with. And, I think we're being asked as a commission to spend 2 hours a month to talk about these issues. So, I guess what my preference would be moving forward is that before we really do a whole lot else, I think we really need to spend however many meetings it is to figure out, out of all of the, the 100 things that could be done in the city, like what is it that we're going to focus on? And we started to get to that a little bit today. I think we spent 15 minutes kind of talking about it, but Jim, I also had the experience of being on the previous housing commission, and, we just really got bogged down, and we're not able to do anything because we were, there were so many things on the table. So, really thinking about with the 2 hours per month that we have, what is it that we can actually do? I mean, I also think that there are so many things we agree on, right? It's like, we all know that we need more affordable housing. We all know that there are barriers. We all know that gentrification and displacement is an issue that needs to be dealt with. So, you know, all of these things that are issues, I think we're probably pretty much in agreement about. So, you know, I guess I'm just asking that as we go forward, we really figure out what it is that we have the capacity to do and figure out how we can focus on some of those things. Because I think I'm with you, Mindy. I really feel a sense of urgency. I mean, people are becoming homeless every day. Fewer and fewer people are able to afford housing. So, you know, again, I guess I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed and would like to know from the rest of y'all how we kind of focus in and actually, you know, get some things done and support the city in a way that I think we all know needs to happen.
Jim?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to, I haven't been able to raise my hand. I just can't get it to happen in this login. So since Jay said it out loud, I just want Jay to know he's not alone. There seem to be some people on the commission and in the meetings who, you know, acknowledgingly know a lot more than I have and probably ever will. So I've been doing a lot of reading. My eyes are sore. I've read documents over and over and over again. I've looked up definitions. And so, you know, Jay, you're not alone. You're just not. And real quick, maybe for Liz and Ann, the quick summary I came away with on the functions was just to boil it down: review, identify, recommend. Now, with those three basics, in the function section where it says identify and work toward eliminating institutional and regulatory barriers to affordable housing and job security, I have a question about the number 4 because it says work toward eliminating. Since we seem to be a body that makes recommendations and commentary, and I don't think we have any power, could you clarify that one for me, please?
Yeah, Mike, I think that's a good distinction in terms of your role as it's laid out right now is to recommend. So you'd be recommending to mayor and council policies that would help eliminate. So it is really you're charged with providing recommendations and advice to mayor and council to take action on.
Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap this up. I think we're gonna continue this discussion going forward. Liz, did you still have your hand up? Do you have other comments?
Just real quick, Anne had texted me a really good idea. We could bring in a facilitator, maybe pick a little bit of a larger chunk of time out of your schedules and find a time that works for everyone, and really just do the work of, you know, of identifying what you can accomplish and want to work on. That is, you know, really around what Jay's talking about, making it not overwhelming, but a clear path forward. So if that's something that, Jim, you would like to have, we can offer a facilitator and do kind of a retreat. Remember, this is a first-time board in a long time, and it's okay to kind of try to figure out what you guys are doing. And 2 hours a month really is not enough to really help you guys get, so just something to consider.
Okay, I think that's a great idea. Okay, before we move on to the last agenda item, are there any last comments? Mindy?
Are we regulated? Is there a regulation that stipulates that we meet once a month for 2 hours? Is that?
No. No, I think we have to follow all the open meeting laws. So we have to give prior notice and meet quorum and all those things. But no, we are not limited to 2 hours.
Okay. And we're not limited to just once a month. We could perhaps, I'm putting it out there that we meet every 3 weeks. I just feel once a month is not going to move us as quickly as we need to. It's just, we'll talk about it next week. Just mull it over, everybody. And
okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Any final comments from anybody else?
When is our next meeting? Because we did not establish our next meeting. We're literally scheduling these like as a. shooting from the hip.
Yeah. Well, I think our next meeting is on the agenda. It says it's May 11th.
That was tentative, and if the commission wants to keep it Tuesdays at 4, then, you know, the May 11th would be 1 month from now, and there's no mayor and council on that Tuesday. May 4th, there is mayor and council, so it's up to the commission's purview here.
Okay. So we'll talk about that actually for next steps. Liz or Ann, which of you is giving the housing update?
I was going to provide it. I actually put it into a document, and I can share it with everyone so I don't take up everyone's time, but let me just give some highlights. We are accepting public comments right now on the Public Housing Authority agency plan and capital plan. The capital plan is the funding for the public housing. In the document I will send out or will post on the website, does talk about the 45-day review period and how you would make your comments. On the 16th, we will be publishing the legal ad and on the annual action plan for the CDBG and home funds and the other entitlement funds. We will plan to go to Mayor and Council May 4th for a public hearing to adopt the annual action plan. We do have a mayor and council meeting. There's going to be a study session item on 4/20 around whether or not HCD should create a development corporation for the expansion of affordable housing. Also on May 4th, we're tentatively planning to do the housing market study that you all heard on last March. Will be the plan is for that to be done for mayor and council. I'm going to provide a link to the emergency rental assistance program that has a dashboard. You can see how many people are being served. We also, I don't know if we mentioned this to you all before, but we are doing department newsletters. Our website does have a place for you to sign up for that. And finally, under the American Rescue Plan, we did get HUD put out a public notice that they have funded like 631 agencies. Tucson is one of them with home funds under the American Rescue Plan for 12 million. It's 12.7 million, and it'll be going to affordable housing and homelessness. We also are expecting some emergency vouchers under the American Rescue Plan to help at-risk or homeless individuals. So more to come on that, but I'll share this update and put it on the website. Thank you.
All right, that's great. That's good news. Okay, so as we previously discussed, our next meeting is scheduled for May 11th. Does that work for everyone? Does that create a problem for anybody on the commission? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and finalize that date, May 11th, 4 o'clock. Any agenda items that any of you would like to see at our next meeting? This is a question that's going to come up every month.
Yeah, I would love to see us, if a facilitator is possible, I think that would be a great idea to talk through, you know, kind of the things that we've been discussing, how to focus our efforts and be as efficient and as effective as possible. So I would really like to dedicate, you know, the next meeting to that if possible. I know there's a lot of other stuff, but I think it's critical.
Okay.
Hey, Jim, I'd like to ask at the end of the meeting for future agenda items. Let's say that we close the meeting and we come up with something. What is the proper way to submit them?
You can email me, and we'll actually email both of us, Mike and me, and we typically have a meeting with Liz and Ann about 2 weeks before the next commission meeting, and we'll set the agenda at that time. So if you email us, then we can make sure to address it. Okay, well, I appreciate everybody's time. I think we had some great discussions today, and we're going to adjourn the meeting. So without, I don't think we need to vote on adjourning. So The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.